Right, so I'm going to ask one question to start with to start it off, and then I'm going to take questions from the floor. So give the candidates 1 minute initially to answer, and then we could possibly have consecutive rounds. So the first question I'm going to ask is, if you could change one thing about Strathclyde University, just right now, what would it be? And I'm going to give that to James first.
I'd like to listen to students.
Paul?
I'd like to make sure that no students drop out for economic reasons.
Glenn?
And just increase communication with students so that students actually know if there's anything changing or anything at all that could affect their education, just increase the communication in the channels. Did everyone hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How?
Should I go first?
Yeah.
By increasing that communication, well, that could be by so many various ways. It could be via social media and actual early sending out emails actually early out to the students. The fact is that, say for example, timetabling, students are often told their timetables later on in the game, and quite often rooms are changed because of logistical reasons. It should really be done earlier, and also what I would do is I'd feed that back to different committees, whether that be timetabling, education strategy, different committees about that.
The how on my part was simply by respecting the university and showing the university has to respect its students, it has to respect the students' union which represents us, and that we're not just children, that we are actually here to get an education, and they can't actually treat us in the way that they often do as misbehaving adolescents.
How would you create that atmosphere of mutual respect?
I would create that atmosphere of mutual respect by, on the one hand, obviously showing the university respect, and on the other hand, showing the kind of negative PR that the university would get if it, in the times that it doesn't respect its students.
Paul?
Unfortunately, there isn't one sort of easy solve-all solution to my answer.
Mike.
Okay, welcome. Sorry? Unfortunately, there isn't one solve-all solution to my answer, but one thing I would say is that there are many ways in which we can make things a lot more economically comfortable for students. One thing would be to subsidise food in the scene, so that those students who feel like they should be able to get 3 meals a day if they want them, 3 good meals a day. Another thing I would say is that we need to have a real hard look at rents. Half of halls are lying empty. I think tenants need a bit more respect and a bit more empowerment as well, so that they know that the union's not only standing with them, but they have a bit of power in themselves as well. And another thing as well, of course, is talking to SAS, talking to the government. Free tuition is all well and good, and it's something I'm passionate to support, but it's not good enough if we have, if, for instance, I need to pay like more than £60 each month just to get in and out of uni, and I live fairly close as well. So things like that, I think that we could certainly help with, and we could move forward on to making sure that no student needs to drop out because they feel they're a bit scared.
Yeah.
Given that many bars in Glasgow attract students in by the horde, despite keeping drinks prices at £2 or above, is there any economic backing to the argument that cheaper drinks equals more people in the union? And what alternative incentives would you introduce should a price reduction measure fail?
I'll let whoever jump in on that one.
Thanks, Matt. Absolutely good question and a very good point on that one. that statement in question actually reaffirms what I said in my speech, that it's not just drinks prices that needs to be changed around here. It's not just the promos. We have to have more events and more diverse events that caters to all students, because at the end of the day, the union, in terms of a social area, is here to cater for all, so that all students can come here and have that safest place to socialise and just have that downtime from studying and whatever they have to do. So that's why I say engage more societies into different events, have different comedians gigs, whatever, just vary it up on a week by week basis, not just have the same event, and also have better sponsorship deals for clubs and societies and other sports groups and everything. They make sure that they stay within the union and feed back into us.
I completely agree that lowering the drinks prices is not the be all and end all, and I think that on its own would definitely not get students back into the union at the level that they once were. I personally think that the biggest problem that we're experiencing, as I said earlier, was that we're not going out speaking to students anymore. I think that was the main thing that brought students in before, and to be honest, actually, I don't think it's really affordable to lower the drinks prices until we actually fill up the union again, because I think that's actually what funds lowering the drinks prices, and that's where I think I can fill up the union like that and lower the drinks prices that way.
Personally, I think trying to fill up the union without lowering drinks prices is sort of putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I would argue that I agree it's a fairly weak economic theory, but generally, if you see Freshers Week, it's completely packed because people are given the promise of a very cheap union. I certainly came in believing that, and we got that for first year. But and I brought my mates in the second year and heard that it had risen to £2 all of a sudden. I was shocked. But I agree that it shouldn't be the be all and end all. Of course not. There's pubs that do pints for like £1.20 in the East End. You don't want to go into. And I think that one way that we make students properly involved is by giving them nights out which properly involve them. It's a very literal statement, but it's the truth. And that's why I'd encourage different gig nights which actually involve students, comedy acts, drama acts, just to give people a sense that they know that the union's behind them, but also so people come along and watch the mates. We all know someone in the band, we all know someone who's an aspiring comedian, no matter how good they are or not. And I'm sure we'd all come round and see if they knew that there was a cheap place in town which was giving them a free gig and was catering for them, letting them show their natural talent. And I think by doing that, they know that the union wasn't just a nice cheap place, but it was also on their side. And that's how I'd argue that we get a place filled up here.
Can I get a clarification point on that, sorry? I just wanted to clarify really that I wasn't actually suggesting that I would lower the drinks prices after we filled up the union. I'm very confident this union can be filled up again, therefore the drinks prices would be low from the start.
Can I take any more questions? Yourself in the blue hoodie.
How would you act to get the postgrad community more involved and more representative in the union?
It's an excellent question. I mean, most of us will know postgrads, for being our tutors or for helping us out through exams. But unfortunately, in the elections, for instance, there's an incredibly poor turnout rate from postgrads, and postgrads feel that they're quite disconnected. I've got a few mates who are postgrads, but I see very few of them in the actual community itself. And I believe one way that we could help this was by letting postgrads know that we're fundamentally still on their side, they're still students. And I think one thing we could do to show this is by revealing the fact that postgrad rates are still completely uncapped. We have this thing in Scotland where we have like a capped rate, and that's I wish it was lower, obviously, but that's the fact. But postgrad rates are completely uncapped, and they're being treated like they're not. There's like one system for them and one system for us, which is wrong. It's created division. And I would argue that one way to increase solidarity and to get them more involved would be to show that we stand with them by arguing that there should be a cap. Thanks.
I didn't actually hear the full question. Could you repeat the question again, please?
It's how would you get the postgrad community more involved and better represented in the union?
Right. Well, on the first point, I would completely agree with Paul about the capped fees. I think it's an outrage that postgraduate fees are not capped right now, and so I really want to work with the NUS to make sure that they are capped in future at a reasonable rate. I think another issue is about the pay rates that postgraduates currently experience when they're marking papers, because I think a lot of the time they're expected to mark a huge, massive pile of papers in only about 2 hours, and they're given like so many pounds an hour to mark that many papers. And in terms of real time, how long it actually takes to mark these papers, they actually end up getting paid a bit less than minimum wage, which obviously is against the law. And I think we need to look at that. We need to make sure that the university is assessing properly how long it takes to mark papers. And I think that's one of the big issues that postgraduates are experiencing. I'd also think that this place isn't really accessible enough for postgraduates. I think we should be going out and speaking to them and making sure that we know what they need and we're providing the things that they need.
Absolutely great question there. Something I'll say, like, in terms of university committees, I think it's very vital that the university committees do talk more about what postgraduates actually need and actually get more feedback from postgraduates, whether that's engaging with the Researcher Society or different core societies out there that do have quite a lot of postgraduates within this society. We need to engage more with the postgraduate community members. Also, keeping with working with societies. What's something I would definitely want to see over the next year is to see more postgraduates socialising within the union. So what we could do maybe is by engaging with the society to put on events that best reflect them and what they think that would entice more postgraduates to come in here and be part of the whole union family, which we'd absolutely would like to champion.
Yeah. Can we get some microphones out here?
Alright, I just wanted to follow on the last postgraduate point. I don't know if you guys know this, but it's actually, recent statistics have shown that only 1 in 10 UK students actually go on to do a postgraduate degree. Now, capping postgraduate fees is one issue, but what we actually want to do to improve funding opportunities for postgraduate students that want to get into do additional studies.
Is me? Yes, Jesus. Is anyone done that? Shall I just take that?
If nobody answers.
So you're first kind of. So yeah, definitely, like, absolute point, great point about the fact that a lot of students want to are actually applying to go into postgraduates, whether it's being postgraduate taught or research. I think it's really something that like departmental heads should be pushing, so that more and more students do feel that see the benefits in doing a postgraduate as well. So yeah, it's something that, sorry, completely fucked up my lines there. Sorry.
Right. As you can probably tell from my reaction there with the other candidates, like, it's not something that I particularly looked at before the election, but it's something that I would really like to. It's something that I would want to actually talk to the Vice President of Education with and make sure it's really resolved, because I think you're absolutely right, Gary. I think it's really important we do make sure that the students are able to go on to postgraduate and they're encouraged to do so.
Well, shock horror, but I actually agree with the two other candidates in this issue. Like, postgraduates are something I think should really be encouraged, and after 2 successful terms of a highest presidency, it's probably something I'd like to do myself. But to be honest, it's obviously not something that the Students' Union has a great degree of control over itself. But one thing I could assure you would be that we would campaign for it, to encourage it, and to talk with the university and with the government to try and get a better dialogue on this at least.
Yeah.
Okay, next year is a really big year for Glasgow City itself hosting the... Thank you. Yeah, Glasgow is hosting, as you know, Commonwealth Games next year, 2014. So what I want to know is, how do you intend to take advantage of such a huge opportunity at Strathclyde? How do you intend to get students involved with that? That's my question.
Well, I think one thing the current exec is doing quite well is encouraging volunteering, and I would to encourage that process, to make sure that there's as many Strathclyde students involved in Azure. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I believe that Commonwealth Games in Glasgow is an absolutely fantastic opportunity to launch stuff. Strathclyde students should be a big part of that, and I'd quite happily work with other student leaders to make sure that we're working together to make sure that as many Strathclyde students are involved in this as possible.
I think that what we need to do is we need to actually look at the different procedures for applying for volunteering for these different positions that there will be for the Commonwealth Games. And what we need to do is we need to go out there and speak to students, make sure they're aware of these different opportunities that are available to them. Because I think it's really important that obviously everyone has access to this, and that it's not just those with connections or with certain specialised knowledge, let's say, that have the opportunity to do this. I think we need to make sure that our whole campus are aware of the opportunities there are to offer, really.
Now, in terms of encouraging more volunteers for the 2014 Games from Strathclyde, actually can't be done because the applications have now closed. If, however, they were to, I don't know, reopen again, then it's definitely something that I would like to encourage more Strathclyders to do, but at the moment can't do it because it's been closed already. However, I feel that I would work with the sports union and help them make the Glasgow Cup next year even bigger by putting maybe if you can't find more sports to compete with that can compete with each other, maybe putting on more exhibition events and just to engage more and more students within the Glasgow Cup. Also, maybe even doing with the League 2014, maybe stretching that out so that we can get more students out there volunteering and maybe encouraging more people to take up sport or even community regeneration projects. So I think we do have an opportunity to put a big stamp on 2014, and it's definitely something I would like to do.
So I'm going to take an anonymous question before I go on. So it's for all candidates. How would you make access? How would you widen access for students that come to university from poorer backgrounds? I see no one mentioned or emphasised it.
Sorry, I was a bit distracted there with what was going on with the microphone and stuff. Could you repeat the question?
How would you? Apologies. How would you widen access from students that come from poorer backgrounds? I see no one mentioned this or emphasised it. Do you want to go first?
This is an issue that I'm really passionate about, and the thing is that I think that one of the things that has been brilliant about I couldn't find it there. Sorry, Malcolm's presidency this year has been the Strathguides Initiative. I think that's been a brilliant way of encouraging people from working class backgrounds and ordinary backgrounds to actually come to university and to see that actually university is possible for them to go to, and all the brilliant things that it can offer to them. I think that's something that I'd very much like to continue on, and I'd also really like to work with NUS Scotland and NUS UK to make sure, because I think that this is a really important important issue on both a national and UK level. This whole issue of basically discrimination between better off and worse off people through going through education.
Well, I'd actually first contest that I didn't mention people coming to Strathclyde from lower backgrounds. One of the main points I made was the fact that one of my principal ideas is to bring forward a tutor clinic to help people from lower backgrounds come to Strathclyde for helping them with their studies, making sure they get the proper hires and salaries they need to actually get access to Strathclyde in the first place. So yeah, I'm kind of confused as to why. I mean, maybe I'm just a terrible speaker, it didn't come across. But yeah, I'd certainly argue that I've got a clear agenda for helping people come from lower backgrounds come to Strathclyde, and if you like me, I'll make that my main priority.
So yes, as I said in my speech, definitely we continue with the Strathguys programme, and we'll like to get more student volunteers out there and into more schools, because reason for this is because it's actively going out and speaking to aspiring students from the SIND 20 background. So it'll give them that aspiration to not necessarily even just come to Strathclyde, but to consider further in higher education as well. Something else I would do is reaffirm to the university that they should have a bigger commitment to wider access. They have agreed an increase to take in more MD20 students, but I think they should increase upon that.
Okay, you've had your hand up for a while. Okay, you next, Rebecca.
Being someone who is very tough from coming to the union due to allergies and dietary restrictions, I'm allergic to dairy products. I found it very difficult to actually find good food at the union, and also the options for me are very unhealthy. How would you promote more healthier options at the union, and how would you promote the fact that there are not many options for us dairy allergics and also vegans?
Should I take that on? Well, I apologise, we only have pizzas this evening.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Me myself, I'm actually lactose intolerant, so dairy's education for me. I'm with you. I'm also allergic to nuts as well, so nut traces can't take as well. So something I have found, like going down to the scene, is that if you do take the time to like just say, like I've got this allergy, I've got that, like I'm really but even butter and bread can't take. That's how strict I am. But I do find other alternatives, and if like the president, then I will definitely put the case that we should make sure that there are other better suitable options for people that maybe celiac, can't take egg, all that kind of thing, and also promote healthier options. Yeah.
I think it's really important that we do provide lots of different options and make sure that in terms of different categories of different allergies that people have, that there are always options available for different people to have. And I think it's also really important that not just that, but the actual staff in our different bars and that sell food are also well drilled on actually knowing what's in these different things and who it's suitable for. I think that's really important. I think in the scene we do like a large amount of healthy food. I really think we should really expand on that. I think there's a lot of students that are asking for a lot more halal meat. I think that's something that we should definitely look at. And yeah, I think that we actually do subsidise the scene to a large extent, and I think we should really continue with that and provide healthy food for our students in that way.
Well, it is an excellent question, and as I said, one of my main priorities is to make sure that every single student gets 3 decent meals a day if they want it from the scene. And I would argue that we need to respect, lactose intolerant and people who have nut allergies, because it's an unfortunately common problem. But also, vegan rights and halal food as well. I think that in Glasgow we have a very vibrant curry scene. That the curry deals at the union often involve quite unhealthy curries, whereas we have like excellent dal and stuff like that just round the corner. So I would argue that it's quite easy that we could push quite healthy and delicious vegan options, with very little actual bother, and that's something that really make a large priority.
Yep. You almost missed it again. I'll take Rebecca.
One of your jobs will be to sit on Estates Committee. If the Director of Estates was to ask you what your wish list would be for Strathclyde, what would it be?
Right. This is an issue that actually I've dealt with quite a lot myself in my time at Strathclyde, because I used to be the president of Andrew Yeo Hall, and I think in terms of like the Halls committee that we currently have, is it's not really good enough right now. Not enough of the time do we actually have union representation actually on that committee. And unfortunately, the university are actually quite heavy on pushing for those committees to mostly be talking about the next party, the next Cayley, which in Gaelic actually means party, that they're actually going to organise. And I think the thing is that we need to actually have genuine representation, genuine conversation in the Halls Committee. I'd really like to always send a representative from the union to these meetings. We actually did a petition at Andrew Hall to change the room inspections that they had there, because many of the students found them very obtrusive, and we still haven't had a response from that yet, so I'd really like to see that dealt with.
Comfortable living arrangements at cheap rates, which students aren't afraid of that status changing.
Yeah, sorry.
Just one thing?
No, three.
Three things?
Wish list.
You're three things on the wish list.
Three, right on, thank you. Yeah, I would definitely say better halls accommodation, because a lot of people, well, James did mention Andrew Ure, a lot of feedback you do get back from students living in Andrew Ure is that it does need a refurbishment around the general areas. There's like draft coming in, so and I just want to make sure that all the other halls have got better standard of accommodation. Other thing I would like to wish for is more space and better availability for all our student groups, clubs, societies, sports clubs to carry out their activities on campus. This is very important so that we can engage as many students within different experiences, just to enhance the experience and just a general refurb of the university.
Right.
Follow-up?
Yeah.
No, it's just that I think I completely agree obviously about the Andrew York point in terms of drafty and that. I think that Thomas Campbell is actually even worse. Thomas Campbell is often completely forgotten. I think that needs to change. Thank you.
Follow up at that.
In light of that last question, bearing in mind that the union has policy, what would your wish list be? Current standing policy?
Could you repeat that, please?
So the union has policy, and there's a big list online that we need to abide by when we're going into different meetings, that sort of thing. For example, when we're going to NUS conference, there's certain things that we have policies mandated by the students that we have to act upon. In regards to the States Committee, what would it be?
I think I'm guessing what is being referred to as the new sports complex, and the fact that there is a policy, the fact that we've it came from the sports forum, the fact that we've to push for a better and newer sports complex, and also have the sports union relocated within the sports complex.
Okay, sorry, were you asking what actually is the current policy, or what we'd like it to become?
The current policy.
Current policy. I don't actually know what the current policy is. I think that when we're going into those kind of meetings, that was something I would definitely look at, but I don't actually think it's something that we should all know by heart.
Just based a policy around two main areas. One being democratic accountability, which I think should be enshrined in all the new policy, but also that we're always fighting for a basic good standard deal for students and a good standard of living in the case of halls.
Right, I've got a quick question here that was submitted anonymously. They're just looking for one answer. You've already answered what would the one change you make be if you were elected. What would be the first thing you did when you got elected?
I would make sure that every student at Strathclyde knows they can come to the union with any problem that they have, and that problem will be resolved. Full stop.
How would you make them aware of that?
We would have posters all around campus saying that this union is your union, and that you should come to the union with any problem that you have. I think that's something that we've never actually had. It's something that we've never actually told our students. Many students don't even know that we're here. They don't even know that they can come to us with any problems. I think this is a massive problem and something that should have been dealt with as our first issue. and that's what I would make sure that would happen.
Just a point of clarification, day after inauguration or day after victory? Because I'm going to have a bit of a hangover, to be honest. But yeah, day after inauguration, I would first get in contact with all the main Scottish tutoring organisations to work out the best way that we can create a tutoring organisation run by students, assisting current high school students so they can get to places like Strathclyde.
First thing I'll do is I'll touch upon the bits of my welfare pledges and start by making sure that as we publicise it on our website and Lothian University to put up on their website about the importance of such things as applying for SAS as early as possible, just to, in case, which is possible, likely if any issues, they could be ironed out before academic time starts, and also before the first payment is actually due, and also start continuing to work on student travel discounts.
Sorry. It was stipulated in the question. Right, I'm going to take the question off Twitter now. We've not had a female president since 2005. Why do you think that is? And what would you do to encourage more women to get involved?
I think this is a massive problem, and another issue is that we've actually not had a very active women's group in the union since about 3-4 years ago. I think that Sarah has actually improved that massively. She's done really well as a women's officer in that, but I think she really needs to be supported a lot more. The women's officer really needs to be worked with. We need to make sure we're going out and speaking to the women of Strathclyde. They actually make up the majority, and yet it's ridiculous how time and time again we only get male candidates for this position. I think we need to really look at the demographics of our candidacies and that they reflect the true demographic of Strathclyde.
I mean, it is a real shame, and we have had some excellent female candidates since 2005. But one thing I would argue is that there's just been not enough, and so there's been too few female candidates. Unfortunately, that one of them wouldn't get through and get lucky with the next manifesto. One thing I think is just problematic in general is student apathy for these elections. We always have really low turnouts, and unfortunately we might have a low turnout this year as well. And I would argue that it goes wider than women, that we should be trying to engage every single student in this election and trying to find ways that by engaging with them, they know what's going on in the union and they know that we're there for them and know that how much democratic power they have. So, but in terms of women directly, women politics has always been a great problem in British democracy in general. It's what we see as quite masculine, but
you got 10 seconds left. Don't generalise into British democracy.
I would argue that working with the women's group, we could get some great female candidates and hopefully a female president after I've done my 2 terms.
So yes, as both were saying, I definitely think that empowering the relevant groups, that's the Women's Action Network and other societies such as Interconnect, which are about females in the so-called STEM subjects. I think that is very important to reach out and make sure that they are more engaged within other union activities and know the possibilities of what can happen if you do engage more in the union. Also, you can also refer using other liberation groups is actually very, very vital. That whether it's be Black students, disabled students, LGBT, I think it's very, very important that representation is increased, and we could do that by actually NUS do have liberation and are quite active and going around. We need to make sure that they are very active here in Strathclyde.
Question over there.
Does political ideology have a role to play in the running of a student union and the way it represents its students?
Go on.
For me personally, my political ideology is best representing the 20,000 Strathclyde students here on campus. It's not about putting forward what I personally think should be done in terms of politics. I think it should be what best reflects the students and what will get them the best experience and the best outcomes from coming to Strathclyde.
I think it would depend on what you mean by political ideology.
Personal political ideology.
Personal political ideology, yeah, but I mean, in the sense of even still, it's quite hard to kind of say exactly what political ideology actually is. Because at the end of the day, you can say that anything is politics. At the end of the day, I would have to say that yes, it does, because fundamentally, the ideology that I would want to lead with in terms of the student union is that everybody's equal. And that is the first premise that I think we should look at in terms of putting anything in place in this union.
I mean, I believe there's a difference between ideology and dogma. I think that if you have a rigid dogma, which is, running the union into the ground, then, obviously ideology has become far too influential. But ideology at its basis is just a set of morals and ethics, which any good candidate should have a good set of, and in that basis, yeah, ideology does have a real role to play.
Do you want to come back on that, Glenn?
That's it. That's it, nothing.
Just trying to get a bit interesting debate about ideals.
Good chat.
Yeah. Yo.
Paul, in your speech you said that bake sales aren't allowed in the union. That's kind of true, but they're allowed as long as you're not in the union building or the library. I don't even know if there's a week last year where there wasn't a bake sale or a ceilidh going on, and I know there's a lot of talk about drinks prices, but the union itself had a lot more stuff going for it than drinks, such as like the old school TFI, like Julian Banjo. So how would you promote the events, the nights, rather than just the drinks?
Well, I think obviously the key to a successful bar and union policy is obviously a successful nights out policy. There's no point in having cheap drinks if people are just going to be standing around bored, and that's why I would have gig nights which would bring in student bands and allow students to actually feel involved in their nights out, bring their mates along and let themselves show off that there's that talent there. That wouldn't only benefit students, but it would actually benefit the community as well, because it would show that we're getting involved in ourselves. And we can go, there's some Strathclyders playing, let's all go and cheer them on. And I think that by doing that, it would help resurrect some of the great nights that we've had. But obviously also keep 12-hour as well, and take 12-hour back to £1 pints every single week. And I think that we should look at getting TFI back. Thoughts good, but I kind of miss TFI.
I think that bake sales should be allowed inside the student union building. And supported by the association as well, because I think that if we think that our own cafe can't compete with a wee bake sale, then I think we've got a problem, really. I would agree with Paul that I think most students want to see the return of TFI, so I would look at re-implementing that as well. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just to clarify, I think the bake sale should be universally allowed to access the union. I don't think there should be I think that if Starbucks feels a little bit of competition, then they can suffer it. They can dodge tax all year, but there's really hard-working students behind these bake sales, and I think that we should give a preference to them, not the massive corporation.
Go.
Yeah. Right. In terms of bake sales, if elected, I will sit down with the executive committee and see what we feel as an exec committee, what our stance is on bake sales. Something, however, I will say is that bake sales weren't completely outlawed. What we actually done was we gave volunteers mobile cars and also gazebos to set up a stall. And feedback I've got from fabrics of society go down is that they've actually made quite a bit more money by actively going out and going to places where there are crowds, because like in the union there are some quiet spots, but actively being mobile, they can go and find those areas that do have a lot of people, therefore can then generate a fundraising for their society.
So like, I've got an anonymous question here on Friday nights, which you were talking about. What would you do if you tried to do better union nights, but they were blocked again by the typical Flirt Friday rubbish?
Well, it's been mentioned here, and it's been mentioned in various places whenever I just go out coaching or speaking to the students. It's bring back TFI. You see it on the Change One Thing board so many times, TFI, DJ Phil, let's bring it back. It's definitely something I would, well, let's hope that maybe he would start doing that again, let's see, but I think we should try out different various nights each Friday and not just have the same one day thing. Let's vary it up, let's get more and more students, different students coming back here, socialising, just having their downtime in that safer space.
I've heard DJ Phil is pursuing a successful career as youth are on.
Yeah, I think you made it clear really in terms of my views on TFI, in the sense that I think that most students are looking about want to see it back. So I'd really like to talk about actually bringing that back, and hopefully we can do that. The thing is about the actual club night of TFI was back in those days when, as I was saying, we were talking to students, we were getting students into the place. We used to be on a level with other clubs in terms of our sound system and that. So the only thing I want to say on that is that I think that what we need to do is we need to upgrade our sound cards and the speakers that are currently in the Barony to make sure that we are up to scratch with the other clubs, and that we can fill that place once again for TFI and for All Night Tuesday, as well as obviously all the other nights as well.
I mean, nothing against Flower. I quite enjoy it now and then, but no, I do prefer TFI, and I think that if there was a democratic mandate to bring it back and the union exec, well, not the exec, the bureaucracy was bolstering that, then there'd be a major constitutional issue, which I think would, need to require serious consequences.
Right, so I had a question directed at myself. I'll take you in a minute. We've got a question.
It's a follow-up.
Oh, a follow-up, right, fair enough. Go good.
Okay, so TFI was dying a slow death about 4 years ago. All those students who used to go to that TFI when it used to be proper TFI have now graduated. So how are you going to bring it back, bearing in mind that this is a safe zone now, and that the person that we can all agree made it TFI what it was can't do it anymore? How are you going to do that?
Okay, can I take that first? First of all, I'd like to say that the implication that TFI was discriminatory is completely untrue. Was that not your implication?
Which part of it? The sex positions on the stage, the toilet roll stuck up people's backside set on fire, or the gauntlet that was laid out where all the women in the room lined up and one male had to run from one side to the next with a pint in their hand, and the women were allowed to hit that male any way they wanted, and if they got to the other side with more than half a pint still in the glass, then they would get free drinks. Which bit did you mean?
I'm actually a fourth year here. I think obviously that was before my time. The TFI Friday that I remember didn't contain any of those things, and the way TFI continued 4 years ago, I think, was non-discriminatory. Although I do obviously concede that the things you said there were obviously definitely discriminatory, and we would not want to see some of those things in this union. Yeah, so that was, like, I don't think there'd be an issue bringing back TFI in the sense of the safe zone. I think that could be quite easily implemented in the way that it once was, obviously, since the changes were made to TFI. I'm sorry, I went through all of that. I forgot your second point there.
Time. Is there anyone else?
Can I?
Will I repeat the second point?
Can I mean, seeing as there was some time taken out for that, do you mind if I answer the second point? There was some time taken out from the applause and stuff.
There's someone else coming.
Okay, of course.
Absolutely good point there, Malcolm, but I think something that what could actually happen is that we have the opportunity to set our own legacy in terms of what Friday nights are actually about here at Strathclyde. And yes, obviously we must keep within the safe zone policy and the no tolerance policy. We can't absolutely have fun in an absolutely safe environment without doing all those loudest behaviour that was described as per Malcolm. What I think we should do is just, if the student population come back and say they want to call it TFI, fair enough, but we do have our opportunity to set our own legacy as to what should be happening at the end of each academic week.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to TFI, none of my mates sort of went, yeah, I can't wait to, objectify women, I can't wait to be a massive misogynist. Not to go too philosophical and say the values of TFI, but what we all aimed for was a good fun night where, we could have a drink with our mates and meet some new people as well. And I think, we can completely resurrect that and have a good time, within the safe zone as well.
Could it might not be misogynistic without people expressly saying that it's misogynistic?
Possibly, but what I mean by that, and obviously a lot of things there just wouldn't be tolerated anymore and shouldn't be. But I believe that by my point there, what I was meaning to say was that we were there for a fun night. Most people were there for a fun night, and we can get a fun night back again without obviously a lot of things which are quite dodgy.
Do you mind if I answer that point? Yeah. Right, on the point of, in terms of TFI dying, I don't think that it was because that TFI was called TFI and the night that it was the reason that it was dying. I think it was dying for the reasons that we've talked about tonight. I think that the fact that Flirt Friday has not been much more successful has proven that.
Do candidates feel that Flirt Friday is discriminatory?
I think any sort of night out which has its symbol as a man and a woman toilet symbol is going to sort of be on the edge.
I don't think that actually being called Flirt Friday is discriminatory, but what I think actually is discriminatory is that there was only heterosexual couples that were shown on the posters, and I would very much like to see different sexualities of people on that poster if we are going to have a sexually based poster for the night out.
Yeah, what was previously said is true. To be flirt is a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's just what is followed up from that, whether it be the actual logos and publicity and what actually happens at the actual event. I think that's what it's more about the fact that if you do things that don't obviously that don't correlate with the no tolerance policy, that's where it's wrong. But for me, flirt is just a name. It could be for anybody, but it should actually maintain the safe zone policy on publicity and actual event.
Do you agree with the other two candidates that the night out currently has problems?
Well, yes, because it's not really where it should be at. Fridays, from what I remember of the union, was going back to the queues, absolutely a lot of people in queues, people actively saying, "Oh, Friday night, let's go to the union." So something does need to be done, which is why I do propose having various events on a different Friday, so that people have a different feel about each Friday. That it's not just the same mundane kind of thing.
Just to say, saying things are just a name is obviously leads down a slippery slope, and I believe that whilst I'm sure it's not first intention, there are ways that we can make it more accessible to LGBT people and also make it a bit more transgender friendly as well, by showing a sort of gender binary and encouraging a male and a female to flirt with each other on the night is sort of not showing the union's access policy to it.
Right, so question off Twitter. Will you change the layout of level 7?
Can I take that? Probably not. Current layout, well, for me personally, being that I've been hand role at the moment, I found the current arrangement is great because, like, I call it team activities. All the activity staff is within my zone and they're in close proximity within the volunteers, so that there is that extra level of engagement when volunteers come up and they're saying, oh, they've got this event on, they're going to be doing this and that, and it's just a way that we're there on hand, that we can give them help and expertise. If volunteers do come back and say that it's not actually working for them, then it is definitely something that we need to go back to the drawing board for.
Probably not, unless there was specific circumstances that came up that we decided that it needed to be tweaked.
I mean, the issue for me isn't really what the tables and chairs are, it's more the fact that, you know, a good degree of people don't actually know that level 7 fundamentally exists. You know, for a lot of students, you know, the union ends in level 6. And I think one thing we need to do is better advertise the fact that, you know, there's a student engagement zone up there, and obviously we do that by being more engaging, being more visible, and, you know, constantly advertising the fact that you can come up and tell me off if you've got a problem, or work with me if you've got, you know, a problem as well. And yeah, so I think that's something more important than, you know, how it looks.
Take a question from the floor. Yourself?
A building.
A building in the university goes on fire. State your first 3 reactions as union president.
My first reaction will be to call the fire brigade, of course. That's if I'm there on scene, obviously, but yeah, I will call the fire brigade. Also, want to make sure that that university comms, like what happened with the James Weir, do send out all forms of communication with social media, email, text message as well, just to alert students to know about the fact that there is a fire going on, and also maybe link up to, for example, like the last time there was the Telegraph that were there on the scene, link them to that so that they can have extra forms of communication just to know what is actually going on. Is that what we're
Right. I think the first thing I would actually do was, if it was outside of normal office hours, then I would call an emergency meeting, and I would make sure that all the executives were around the table and that we were straight away in touch with the university authorities and what they were going to do for students who had classes scheduled for in that building the next day, and to make sure they were facilitated properly. I think that's our responsibility to make sure that students are properly treated after such an incident. And obviously, if during off in office hours, we would just have that meeting during those hours, and that's what we do.
Well, the first thing we do, of course, is call Sharon Deep to make sure that he called the fire brigade. Yeah, I don't think there's any difference between us here. You know, obviously you would call the fire brigade first. You would make sure the comms, you know, was making sure that everyone was okay, and then you would try and get an emergency meeting to make sure that you're doing everything you can to help.
Well, I'm annoyed that Paul got in the first Sharon Deep too. Any more questions from the floor? Yep. Do you want to go first?
In my opinion, and many others as well who I've been talking to, say that the union is a gloomy place as a physical place. For instance, the Barony is a dark, sticky place that nobody really likes to go to, apart from the cheap drinks sometimes. What would you do to make the union a nicer place physically, and what would be your priorities in making, like, what places in the union would be your priorities?
Well, there's obviously no reason for it to be sticky, but I think, you know, the Barony started for a reason, which is, you know, it was historically meant to be a club venue, and you know, I think that it's sort of odd that it's starting now that we've sort of given up on focusing on club nights themselves, but what I would do is bring that back so the Barony would be dark for a reason. That sounds quite sinister, but yeah. In terms of making the union a nicer place, I think buildings are just made nicer by nicer people. There's been some pretty horrific buildings in the past which have had some pretty nice things take place, and you know, my high school looked like a nightmare, but you know, I got through it. And you know, I think that in terms of brightening the place up, you know, maybe give it like a paint, some, you know, brighter colours, but in general I think, you know, the union is a nice place, and you know, we can make it nicer by policies and, rather than presentation, but we should do both.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right. In terms of brightening it up, first and easy thing you can do is remove the boards that actually block the windows to let natural light in. Yeah, that's the first thing I would like to do. In terms of the sticky floors, the floor had, I think it was 2 years ago or last year, and it actually got reboarded and everything. I think something that I would do is look at getting better seating in, and maybe some better, maybe some booths in, so that it's a more kind of living room kind of feel, so that it's like you're in your bar, you're in a bar in your own living room.
Right. I'd like to agree with Paul in the sense that I don't think we should give up on the Barony as a club venue. I think that, like, earlier on hours of nights, it's a good bar, and it should possibly do maybe some pub food or things like that. And I think I would generally kind of agree that it doesn't really need much apart from possibly some areas might need painting. I think the tables possibly need another stand, and I've already mentioned that I think that the sound system needs upgrading. And yeah, I think that we can use that venue in the same way as we did and have it full again in the way that I've talked about earlier.
Right,
so can I just say, one thing, it's more of a technical issue more than presentation, but the pool tables in level 3 could do with a relaying, because you know, they're quite crater in that. It's something we could do quite easily, is to make it easier to have a game of pool.
Right, so I got a question on Twitter a while ago. It was, what is the SIMD20? What does it mean and why is it important?
SIMD20 stands for Scottish Index of Multiply Deprived 20%, and that's people that live in disadvantaged backgrounds in the lower scale of 20%. Why it's important is that they need education. I personally think is a very powerful tool, powerful thing, and there's not that much in terms of admissions even to further education of students or aspiring students, I should say, from the SIMD20. That's why I feel that it's very important that we do get more and more people from there applying for education and actually getting accepted into further higher education.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with everything there. I think that we need to work with the NUS to make sure that the G20 schools and deprived areas, catchment areas and that are able to go into university. I think that, obviously we talked about Strathguys, we want to continue. The candidates for the NUS Scotland presidency have made some very good points about how we continue that, and I'd really like to work with them to make sure that we make that a priority.
I actually agree with what both candidates have already said. SIMD20 is a real problem, and there really is no point having universal free education if there isn't universal access. But one way I think we can tackle it in Strathclyde is through this tutor clinic, which I'm fronting just now. And I believe that by doing that, we can make sure that everyone who couldn't afford a tutor otherwise would have access to the best grades possible, and by doing that, you know, we could maybe get a bit better university access in the future.
Gary?
Yeah, obviously this year there's been quite a lot of problems with welfare issues. We're looking at, obviously SARS has left people in the lodge right until December. Actually in March, still having problems with SARS. I didn't get paid last week. We're seeing accommodation fees that have doubled in a decade that take up 3/4 of the loan. What can you do as the youth president to make welfare more of a priority and improve student welfare?
Well, the first thing we can do, of course, is make sure that everyone can, you know, get proper food in the union. The second thing we can do is, of course, work with NUS Scotland and fellow student leaders to make sure that we fight to try and reinstate travel expenses and make sure SAS doesn't screw up monumentally again like they did last year, which, you know, many of my friends, you know, it ranged from not being able to buy Christmas presents to not being able to afford their heating bills. And it just was a real failure in what was meant to be an institution based on universal access for all students. Some people even had to drop out. And I don't believe that you know, SAS is working properly. And I think that one thing we should really do is work with NUS and fellow students, as I said, to correct that. On another point, I would argue that through working with halls tenants, that we can try and get a better deal for them as well, maybe empower them properly, so they don't feel like they need to put up with all the problems they do just now.
Right. In terms of the fees that you mentioned before, I think that our UK fees are a big issue. I know that obviously...
mentioned our UK fees, sorry.
No, but you were talking about fees.
Sorry, I was talking about... I meant accommodation fees.
Accommodation fees, right, okay, that would make more sense, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I misheard you.
It's okay.
I actually thought that Paul wasn't actually addressing the question, but obviously I'm wrong, I'm sorry.
If you've got time, you've got to go.
Okay, would you like to go first, Baku?
Right. In terms of accommodation fees, even though, well, if students do get their payments on time, even though SAS is, the level of SAS loans is actually going up next year, it's very vital that we make sure that accommodation fees do not rise in accordance to that, because I think it'll be a very dangerous move and a bad thing to do if they just raise them up purely because of the amount of support going up. Also, like in light of travel, like over 70% of Strathclydeers actually commute in. That's why I feel that student travel discounts is very, very important to the agenda, because a lot of the travel discounts out there are not tailored to the lifestyle of a student. And I think it's actually really, really pointless if you're going to offer a discount to somebody that can't really use it. It's pointless, it's a waste of time. We need to have better discounts where students can actually use it to commute in. I'm referring to the 60 to 25 real card. I'm talking about Subway. It's close to there's 5 institutions that are close to Subway. There's no student discount. What's up with that?
Right. In terms of accommodation fees, I think that is a big impact on students' finances, and I think that Quacker made a really good point about the travel concessions and things like that. That's actually something that I mentioned in my manifesto, because I think currently the student discounts that we currently have on travel are either not substantial enough and don't truly reflect the nature that students aren't paid, and the fact that the universities don't expect students to even have part-time work with the nature of their courses. And I think that that really needs to be taken into account when these concessions are put in place. Unfortunately, on some transport means and some things, the commodities and that students use, there isn't even a student discount at all, which I think is completely disproportionate. I think, obviously I talked about the Halls Committee, and I think we need to make sure that students have proper representation, and we also need to look at that in terms of private accommodation, make sure that the students are being viewed to the tenants and that, because I think that's a big problem for a lot of students.
Can I just get a follow-up, just really quickly? Sorry. So I've actually been speaking to quite a lot of candidates over a spread of different positions, and the there seems to be kind of confusion about where the role of remit for welfare falls into. Anyone that's following Youth for Run will see some hilarious tweets around that as well. What will you do actually as a union? What are you pointing at? What can the union actually do to make welfare more of a priority within the union? I know you've talked about some actual policies, but it seems to me that nobody actually really knows who deals with welfare issues. So if you would be able to answer that, would be awesome.
I think the easiest explanation for this would be a welfare officer put into the exec. Either as a SAP position or as a part-time position, it's very important that students know there's a direct access to an individual which is going to deal with welfare concerns.
Yeah. At the moment, in the current executive roles and remit, welfare is under the remit of Vice President Diversity and Advocacy. I feel that diversity and advocacy is very, very important because you want to make sure that students from all diverse backgrounds and liberation and what have you as equal opportunities as everyone else, making everyone equal. Paul's absolutely right. Maybe we could have a Vice President of Welfare and Communities, SAP, whether we can have a Vice Chair. It's definitely something that we need to reaffirm because at the end of the day, without welfare and without students having the full-on support they need to even just get into university, then they're not going to obtain their grades and they're not going to achieve what they came here to do.
Yeah. This is actually an issue that myself and Dominique have discussed sometimes because I'm the Vice Chair of Diversity and Advocacy here. One of the things that we're actually looking at implementing right now is actually having a proper kind of council that most of the other vice presidents actually already have. I think we already have obviously women's officer, race relations officer, these kind of things and that. But what we're looking at doing is actually having a proper kind of council between these positions to make sure we've got good crossover between them. And I think another thing we're looking at is actually kind of including within that having either like a welfare officer position there or some kind of position that caters to students from less well-off backgrounds.
Rebecca, give us your next question.
Straight away.
Okay, this question is for James. Basically, I wanted a clarification point on your manifesto. When you talked about lowering senior staff pay, who do you mean by senior staff, and how will you do that?
Without mentioning names, by the way.
Yeah, no, of course. I'm actually not talking about any individuals. The whole issue that I think that we have right now is that our highest earners actually earn 500% of our actual lowest earners at the union. And I don't think that quite actually makes sense. The current, see Malcolm working out there. But
I'm trying to work out what staff you're talking about when you're talking about a low salary. You're talking about part-time.
I'm talking about the bar staff compared to our highest paid staff. And obviously bar staff, catering staff, and our lowest paid staff that we have at the union.
Full-time.
Sorry?
Full-time.
Either way, I'm talking about our lowest wage per hour compared to our highest wage per hour. So this is actually something that I've looked into great length because obviously it has a lot of implications on employment law, and it's something that I think a lot of students are really interested in, and a lot of students aren't happy with the very kind of stretched wage structure that we currently have. And the way I want to address that is by flat leveling the actual inflationary pay rises that come along. So basically what that would mean was if inflation was, let's say, at 5% and the structure of universities nationally decided upon a 5% increase for that year according to like university pay structures, instead of us implementing that across the board as a 5% increase, we would work out how much that cost the union as a monetary amount, and then we would divide that up equally amongst the hours that people work in the union, and everyone would get the same monetary increase per hour, meaning that in the long term, our lowest paid workers would come up to closer to a level to our highest paid people in the union. So hopefully in the future, like our highest wouldn't earn any more 20% of the lowest.
Would the other candidates take similar measures to make pay more equal?
I think making pay more equal as a goal in itself sort of goes back to the dogma I was talking about earlier. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean that if you give everyone a terrible wage, then you've succeeded in giving everyone equality? I think that the best way forward with this would be something I'm quite passionate about myself, which is the living wage. And I would desire a quicker implementation of that and ways that we can make sure that all staff get a good, fair wage for their work. And I think that through doing that, we can have a more qualitative approach rather than a sort of focus on a sort of like rigid dogma, so to speak.
Can I just make an extra point on that I don't think the living wage is a fair wage. I want to implement that immediately, which I know we can afford, but then I would like to then, through the measures I was talking about, get towards actually having a fair wage for staff.
Yes, the association has signed up to the living wage, and basically means that it will be retrospective if the living wage does go up in years. With that does mean that people like our bar staff, catering staff, who some actually happen to be Strathclyde students or students from any other institution as well, and also our student interns actually do get a fairer wage. When you do compare that to other external like bars and clubs and stuff, they don't get as much as we do offer here. So I feel it is that we're committing to a fairer wage. So I don't think too big of a step right now needs to be done. I think we should just keep pushing towards our students and all the staff that come into the work in the union.
What would you do about wages at the top?
Well, I don't know all the full wages at the top, but if it is far too high, then we'll need to look through this at trustee level. I don't think it's just something that the president has the absolute full right to do. It should be done at full trustee level. Trustee board sit down and look at all the wages.
I think that was a kind of a point towards myself. Do you mind if I reply to that? And I agree that it's not actually within the full remit of the president to do that, but this is something that I would want to work with the rest of the executive to make sure it was implemented. We're not talking about actually any actual pay cuts. We're talking about flat levelling inflationary pay rises to make, in the long run, the pay structure to flatten.
James, I want to know if you would personally consider taking a pay cut.
Yes, I would, yeah. I think that the issue with that really is that the president's wages is currently in line with the rest of the vice president's wages. So I think that was something that would have to be discussed with the other vice presidents. If the other vice presidents were happy with a pay cut, I would also accept the same.